Okay, so we are here at Istituto Fermi in Mantova, and we have this great honor to have Professor Dourmashkin from M.I.T. in Boston. So it's a great pleasure and honor for us to have you here, and so we would like to get this opportunity to ask you some questions about this TEAL methodology that we are experimenting now in Italy as well. And of course, you are we could say a sort of guru in this methodology. So first of all, would you please tell us something about the theoretical framework that's behind this methodology?
Well, the TEAL methodology has its origins in studio physics, which is a program that was developed by Jack Wisdom at RPI and carried through by Bob Buechner at North Carolina State University. But the real issue in physics started in the late 70s and 80s when the physics community developed an active physics education research community. And this took a while to establish it as a field because physicists they're not educators, they're not specialists in education, but what they are specialists is in experiments and taking data. And so what developed starting in the University of Arizona by a number of people, Hestonese in particular, developed diagnostic tests to measure whether students are actually learning physics. And over the course of the last really 30, 40 years, this very strong community of physics education research has grown up. University of Colorado, led by Carl Weinman, has one of the biggest communities. University of Washington, Maryland, Harvard, Eric Mazur, Lillian Dermott at the University of Washington. And what they've done is they've studied the conceptual misunderstandings in physics, and they've designed a series of activities based on getting students engaged in understanding and resolving those conceptual misconceptions. And that's been going on for a long time. People have been taking data, measuring, a lot of development has gone there. And that's the main structural component behind why we changed the education format at MIT. Now, Carl Weinman's group has been exploring how people actually learn, and they're looking at a lot of cognitive dissonance, and they're comparing psychological learning models to what's going on in the physics classroom, and this is really an ongoing project. Our TEAL classroom is not, you said the word guru, I would not agree with that. We practice a type of active learning that is based on our MIT culture, and we use a lot of active learning elements. I would rate ourselves not as, as the most radical type of innovation. We combine traditional pedagogies with active learning, and the reason for that is we have a very unique MIT teaching and student culture, and the way we developed our curriculum, the way we developed our content, depended on making it work in the classroom, and we had to have our teachers and our students work together, and it took a long time to figure out.
So could you tell us something more about the benefits that you could get from both for students and teachers?
Okay, the main benefit for students was that they were learning more physics. What actually drove the problem was other departments were telling physics that that when students came into second and third year, they had not learned the first year physics in the traditional lecture format. And now that's not there as much anymore. We've measured students' learning gains through a variety of different tests. What's also extremely important is the failure rate has dropped considerably. For MIT, our failure rate in the first year physics before TEAL was 15 to 20%, depending on the year, depending on the lecturer. Now, because TEAL is active learning, it's content-driven, it's not based on an individual choices of a lecturer, there's less fluctuations. And our failure rate has dropped to at most 5%, sometimes less. So that's very important. Our tests are actually measurably, they're harder than old tests. So and our grading is, we have the grading schemes from all past years. So it's not as, failure rate could go down because you could just pass everybody. But our tests are harder, and the failure rate has gone down. Also for the students, what we've noticed is, and this is a very important issue in terms of getting women students interested in the STEM, science, technology, engineering, mathematics, is, and we have lots of data on this, is that the women students in physics classes are doing much better than they've ever done. And if we look at the top 40 students in the class, there's more than 2/3 are women, and this is a big change from the old physics classes. I think a lot of that is based on, again, the pedagogy. It's collaborative, collaborative learning, where students are talking with each other, helping each other. It's not what I would call a traditional gatekeeper type of class, where you try to keep students out by failing most of them. And I think this induces a new model in education in which women are much more encouraged to go into physics. And it's only the beginning at the undergraduate level. This should be happening at the high school level and at the grade school level and all the way through mentoring level at the graduate level. But still, we're doing what we can there. From the faculty's perspective, what is really surprising is actually that TEAL takes less amount of their time, because the content's already there. They don't have to repeat, develop content, which is, in some sense, just rewriting old problems or old exams. We have a content for them. The focus is now on learning, and that their job is to figure out how to get their students to learn more, which is far more interesting and interactive for them. So actually, the MIT faculty, their time is the most precious thing, and we're saving them time and getting a better outcome.
So you mentioned STEM. What do you think about applying TEAL methodology to humanistic areas? Do you think it would be possible? Or
well, I think actually, if you look closely in humanistic areas, in principle, they already have lots to tell us about about the active learning, because in architecture studios, it's all active learning. Music, it's all practice, active learning. Sports, it's all active learning. Language is the really interesting place where not only can you have active learning, but that's, I think, the best place for technology to emerge in cooperation with active techniques. I can just imagine 5 years from now, this interview, you'll be talking in Italian. My computer will be telling me what you're saying. I'll be speaking in English. And our computers will have, it won't be a Google translation, it will be a real translation. And, 10 years from now, the technology will be there for multi-language translations. So I think language classes will be extremely interesting. Literature classes and history classes, there the interesting thing is what's done before class and what's discussed in class. So if you think about it, a history class or a literature class is an example of what's called blended learning. You read the book beforehand. Now, not all students do, but if you read beforehand, you're prepared for a class at the time. But again, in the classroom, if the teachers are analyzing text or language and there's screens, you can, for instance, if you're curious about phrasing or words, you can then use all these search engines to see how many times a certain word has been used, in what context, what history. So the fact that you can now search huge databases in the classroom is a tremendous way that the technology can be used to enhance the active learning.
So going back to the acronym, so to the role of technology that we've been mentioning. So what is the role of technology? I mean, what is the equipment that is needed to...
well, for starters, I think the most important thing is to have a communication software between the students and the teachers that can be looked at in real time. Now, you can have very simplified versions of this.
So not a particular advanced equipment?
Well, just as an example, Eric Mazur's clickers and concept tests require some type of technology to communicate what students are thinking in real time to the professors. Now, when Eric designed this back in the 90s, he was just using cards with numbers or colors. Then clickers came in and became fashionable. Now the Missouri group developed this whole software called Learning Catalytics, which is a software management system that integrates what the students are doing in class with the teachers. They can see back and forth. So when Eric asks a concept question, he immediately sees a graph, a representation of the students in the room, which students got it right, where the hotspots are, which students got it wrong. And he can actually, they connect with the cell phones into this database, and he can tell people who to talk to. He can say, talk to cell phone number, and which person. So they can actually orchestrate the conversation in a lecture-based classroom using a technology. That's not even in a TEAL classroom, but in a more interactive room, you can organize that. So communication software, access to whatever students are working on, having that be shared with the room. So the next level of technology can be achieved a number of different ways. You can have students working on iPads and connect that to screens so students can see, and I see that in the TEAL room here. You can have, what's interesting is that iPads are nice, but they are limited. Sometimes you want paper, and how do you get what students are writing in their notebooks, writing on their page, distributed to the whole class? Another place where technology is absolutely crucial is things can be orchestrated. Teachers can have presentations, but spontaneity happens. And if some people are writing at a board, how do you capture what they're writing at the board in, so that students can look at that later? Now, if you had simple cameras, the way students capture things, and I see in this talk today, the way people capture things, they took their iPad out and took a photograph. That's what everybody does now, but that's not digital. So how do you capture what's on the screen and translate that to the students? You can have a PDF record of anything that happens outside of what's already on the slides. So having capture technology. And then there's a whole nother level of active learning. If you have project-based or discovery activities, students are building things, they're using the internet as references and information, and how are you going to coordinate that? So our class is still second generation TEAL. I think that it's not so much the actual thing, the camera or a screen or a projector. It's the idea behind what is the technology trying to achieve, which is communication and transfer of information between people back and forth. And as the technologies change, that will, you don't want to build a room which will be outdated, it will be very expensive and outdated in 3 years. So by focusing on what is it that you're trying to actually communicate, I think that to me guides the technology. One more example though is the ability to use apps to take data in real time, sensor technology and app technology, to be able to measure things and to be able to use that in the classroom in real time. That's something that I would focus a lot of attention on, because then students can actually measure stuff. They can measure collisions, they can measure momentum transfer, they can measure forces, they can measure acceleration, they can, and in other subjects, sensors can be measuring things all the time. And so the ability to do hands-on activities can be complemented by actual analytic data taking. That's useful for the students.
So in this new setting, with this new methodology, the role of the teacher has completely changed. Can you say something about the key competencies of a TEAL teacher and the possible training that you would suggest for a TEAL teacher?
Okay, so I think that the role of the teacher does get transformed in an active classroom. A teacher, it's important for a teacher to interact with the students, but I think as on a variety of different levels. Again, I'll use a different example in sports. If a student is trying to learn how to do something new, a coach will watch them do it and give them some advice, and they'll practice that. So in the TEAL classroom, there's an important part of the teacher as being a good communicator, as a coach, and measuring. Okay. Second role of the teacher is they really need to think about how they're measuring whether students are learning or not. So the role of the teacher shifts from just delivering information to measuring learning and aiding the learning. I think training is absolutely crucial. What we discovered in the TEAL classroom was that when we first began, we didn't train our teachers very well because we were worried about developing content and making it work. Just getting all the pieces together and figuring out how they went together like a puzzle, where some of the pieces just, either there was a couple pieces missing under the table, the cat ate it, and so we didn't focus enough on teacher training. Now, the best way to do teacher training is to have teachers watching in a TEAL classroom, co-teaching, not being responsible for the class, but working with another person who has a little more experience.
Shadowing.
And shadowing. And for also having, a constant, the first time teachers begin in the classroom, having somebody there who is more experienced, who can help them through the first couple of weeks. Most teachers find the technological environment a little intimidating. I would find it intimidating to make everything work. Sometimes it doesn't. Many times it doesn't work, and you spend your whole class being frustrated that you're trying to get on the internet and you can't, and so it becomes counterproductive. So until the teacher gets used to being in the classroom, there should be a team that's helping them make sure that they can make that transition time, and it's a different amount of time for different people. It actually goes a lot faster than you would think, but teachers definitely need some help. At MIT, when we introduce a new teacher to it, we have them look the year before, we train them, and then when they're actually beginning, especially in the first week, somebody experienced from our teaching team is there in the class, helping them with just making it work. And we tell the teachers they should focus on the pedagogy, on the learning, not worried about making the technology work until they're much more comfortable in the new space.
Okay, in a TEAL lesson, is there a specific and fixed format to follow? Is it just flexible and...
Okay, well, remember, TEAL is just active learning with some technology. So it's not that it's a structured ideology about how to teach. The idea is to get students to engage in active learning, to use a lot of different approaches of active learning. In our TEAL class, and I think the flexibility should depend on the local institution, what works for the teachers, what works for the students. It's very important to bring students into the equation, because if, like, we made this problem at first where our students didn't like our TEAL environment. The same thing goes with how you structure an active learning classroom. Whether you have tables with 9 students, 3 apiece, teachers always ask that, should we have that? And my answer is, not necessarily. It depends on what your classroom is like. And if you want to have groups of 4 or groups of 5, I've seen tables of 6, whatever. If you don't have to fix the tables in the room, it can be more flexible, the architecture can vary. Flexibility is the key, because the more flexible the structure, the architectural structure to the classroom, the more different disciplines can adapt to it. If you freeze the structure for a particular discipline, and I say our classroom is a bit more like that, then other disciplines can't use that because it doesn't work. It's too rigid, it doesn't work for them. I think I can end by saying I asked Professor McDermott, Lillian McDermott at the University of Washington about this point. And she's one of the major leading experts in physics education research. She has a huge group of graduate students. We just asked about group size. What's the best way to form the groups? Should we have one advanced student, middle, medium? And her response was, whatever works, do that in the local culture. Don't worry about having a structural, a rigid idea about setting up the class. See what works best in the local environment.
Thank you very much. Thank you for your time and for your inspiring suggestions.
Okay,
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.